Commissioner, it's good to see you again here. The Houston region really bore the brunt of Hurricane Beryl's rains and wind and everything else here, but it was the last to get help. We're post-storm now several weeks. Why in the world was that?
Jason, I think what you're seeing is the series of unnatural disasters that have hit Houston, Harris County, is really showing us that we got to be more resilient. And some of the problems that we have won't be solved overnight with one storm. There's some long-term systemic problems. Now take Beryl as an example. Death toll in Houston region has risen by 5 to at least 18 people dead, maybe more, according to the medical examiner's latest report Wednesday morning. 2.2 million people without power at the height of the storm. Today, right now, 24,309 still without power as of this morning. I'm told maybe in the next 24 hours, others may come back online. Beryl is the earliest storm on record to become a Category 5 Atlantic hurricane. And, Beryl breaks Emily's record from 2005 as the earliest Category 5 Atlantic hurricane, which impacted Mexico and the Caribbean, and the only one to form before some point later in the season when we're accustomed to them, to storms coming in. But when you look at that, it tells you something. You think about 2005, the same year of Rita and Katrina, Beryl's forecasted path in the Gulf of Mexico shifted significantly, with forecasts originally predicting it would hit Northeast Mexico. So here's the point I'm making. It is not as predictable coming right after the retro. It hit us, and it was just something we were not quite ready for. So I always make the point. These are unnatural disasters. Climate change is real. And the real question is, what are we going to do to be more resilient going into the long haul? This is going to have an impact on economic development at some point. I'm hearing from people who are saying, should we pack up and leave?
Hold that thought, because I want to ask you specifically about that. Commissioner, let me ask you just right out of the gate here. How do you rate the state's response to Hurricane Beryl?
The state's response was clearly inadequate this go around. I mean, the paperwork should have taken the course that it normally took. Knowing that something is coming, the paperwork should have been signed and submitted to the White House just in case and amended later. But you know what? I won't even get hung up on that. I think we're going to learn the lesson from it in the future. But what's happening with climate change, anytime there's any hint of a storm hitting Texas, not just Harris County and Houston, anywhere on the Gulf Coast, go ahead and ask for the emergency declaration. And if something changes and you don't get it, I would prefer to ask and be denied and not have asked. So I won't get into the back and forth. I've seen the press accounts where it clearly shows that in the past, the request was made before the storm hit. So let's just agree in the future, let's always do that. The challenges that fall on the state's shoulders. Look, hey, for 26 years of my life, I was one of those people whose shoulders it would have fell on. The PUC has not done its job. I won't say the PUC is not doing its job. It has not done its job in the past, because you can't wait until there's a crisis. You'd have to go back and ask probative questions about what changes have come about to help make the grid more sustainable since the winter event, since Uri. And then after this is done, we want to make sure we don't just go through the process, have a blue ribbon panel, put some report on the table as though we did something. Take a deep analytical look at what has gone wrong. What we have in Texas is a system where for decades, I can't remember the exact number, maybe almost a century, we've had a regulated monopoly. And more constraints should have been put on, not just CenterPoint, Encore as well. I'm sure you've seen the press accounts where there was a significant slap on the hand of Encore. But you got to figure out how to operate preemptively before these things happen. And some of it may go back to when deregulation. You and I've been around, Jason, a long time. Part of the Enron legacy and Ken Lay's legacy was pushing deregulation.
Sure.
So it's a regulated industry, but it's a regulated monopoly. So maybe we need to look at what can be done so you have more players in the process and figure out what can be done, not just to pass on more to the ratepayers, but make the company feel some pain and not just Centerpoint, all of them. And that falls squarely on the state. Bill White, when he was mayor, set up a local blue ribbon committee to look at what went wrong, what could be changed from a weather event on his watch.
After Katrina.
Yeah, after Katrina.
Rita,
so go back and ask, and Rita, go back and ask what changes came about on the local level.
Sure.
Pretty much all you can do is raise the hard questions. You really don't have the ability to impact what happens. That's the PUC. That's the governor. Those are our state leaders. That's the legislature.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about that, because Governor Abbott told Centerpoint it needs to create and submit a storm preparedness plan, and it needs to cut all the vegetation away from power lines by the end of August. That's 6 weeks from now. That's impossible to achieve. What do you think Centerpoint needs to prioritize first?
I think they need to make sure that they do those basics. If they have generators and they're too large to be used, they need to figure out what can be done to get permission or use some of their funds to buy some generators that they can get out. They got to figure out what can be done as a right now issue. And obviously, ordering more durable power lines instead of wooden ones, that ought to be an equation, but you can't put them in overnight. Even if you order them with supply chain issues around the world from the pandemic, when do you get them in? You ought to look at what best practices are, if I were in their shoes, around the country. Obviously, do as much as you can to remove the vegetation. If you got to bring in more crews, bring them in to go and do that. If you have to ask for some emergency support from the state, ask. If you can't make the case to get the support from the state, take it out of your bottom line, because for them, obviously, their business model is at risk. And they want to do as much as they can before the legislature continues to feel the heat.
Right.
And it's something much stronger. But look, I think what you have are state leaders who are caught a bit flat-footed, and you got to point the fingers somewhere. And I'm just saying part of that finger pointing ought to go back to what has not happened in the past. And it's not a partisan comment. I can remember when I first went into state government, the big issue was electing members of the Public Utilities Commission. And I can remember the big issue was putting a housewife on the PUC. Back when Mark White was running, he put Peggy Rossin from El Paso on it, who ended up being a state senator and served with me in the Senate for a while. I think I got there a little before, but served with her for a term or so. But look, to the extent the state regulatory body does not have power, they ought to ask the legislature to give it to them. The governor's office ought to put together a package. You can't solve all of this before the next storm. Even if you called a special session and went in next week, you need to figure out what to do, and you look at best practices around the country. But the regulatory piece is a big part of it. But if I was Centerpoint, which was your question, I'd do as much as I could to get this power back on and do as much as I could to prepare for the next storm coming this season. And if I had to spend money out of my bottom line to do it, I would do it, because I think the heat's going to stay on. This is going to have a tremendous impact on our ability to attract people and industries to Texas, not just Harris County and Houston, but to Texas.
Does Centerpoint need a change in leadership?
I don't know. I know there have been changes in the leadership over the last few years. And I just think that changing leadership in and of itself would not be enough. Sometimes that is a flashpoint that we look to in government. So if you got a problem, find somebody that you can have fall on the sword. What needs to be done is improve processes that are in place. And that takes an investment. It means money. And don't just feel like you can just send it all to the ratepayers. Look at how much you've been taking out and how much you invested in your business model, look, in some ways you ought to feel lucky to have had a regulated monopoly, not just for Centerpoint, but you take the one where you are.
Sure.
That's a regulated monopoly as well. Sometimes competition makes us better. I have to go through one every 4 years to hold on to this job I have.
And it is competition indeed. So often after these disasters, changes are made, but you and I and the citizens end up paying the price for them, literally paying the price in our monthly bill. Do you think that's going to happen here? Are the people of Houston going to see increases on their electric bills to handle the storm preparedness, to handle eliminating vegetation from power lines and any other changes this Centerpoint makes?
Traditionally, that has been the case. And if it does happen, the buck stops at the leadership on the state level, not on the local level. You know, the way the system works, I think you're going to see our county stepping in, asking our county attorney or our administration to get involved in these rate hearings. But traditionally, yes, they have passed it on. But there'll be hard questions about what have you done? And then you're going to run into this dilemma. Is somebody too big to fail? Long term, you got to change the structure so there's some competition. But when you got a regulated monopoly, what do you do? So when you finish the saber rattling, if you didn't have Centerpoint here, if you didn't have Encore there, or the bigger players, what do you do? So what you got to do is long-term, put systems in place where there's some competition. There's some checks and balances along the way, because there'll be a tremendous pushback, a blowback on people who are in public office to just pass it on to the ratepayers. And in the media, you're going to be asking hard questions.
Sure.
You're going to ask, well, what do you pay these CEOs? You know, what has been your rate of return?
Yeah.
And then what do the consumers get out of you having the benefit of decades being a regulated monopoly? Now, that's the best monopoly you can have. One where the regulations keep you in charge as a monopoly.
And you're locked in. Here's the last question I have for you, Commissioner. Houston has experienced two very serious storms that knocked out electricity over the last few months. These are massive swaths of electrical customers that have lost power here. Are you concerned that these two recent storms might at some point impact economic development? Because these headlines have gone nationwide.
Harris County is larger than 25 states. 5 million people in this county alone. As Houston goes, Texas goes. As Harris County goes, Texas goes. So for my friends in North Texas, around the state, don't just think this is just a Houston problem. We're the energy capital of the world. That is as embarrassing as you can get. For the energy capital of the world, have 2.2 million people with no power. Some going on 9 days without power in over 100-degree weather. More storms are coming. The quick answer is yes. It's going to have an impact on economic development for this state. And this state is such a driver, is such an engine for economic development in America.
You think it will have companies or businesses or people rethinking an investment in Houston?
My first call was to a potential major player that I participated in on a pitch to try to bring into Harris County. And I said, you know, what are you doing to call and make the case that we're going to get this right? Yes, it's going to have an impact. I think that's why you're going to see state leaders willing to hopefully make some investment on their end. You're going to see local leaders making noise. That's basically what we can do. I have a slightly larger bully pulpit than the average person on the street. So does the mayor of Houston, council members, my colleagues and the county judge. But the pressure is going to be on the state, because they control the PUC. And at a time when state government is doing so much to limit the power they will have on the local level, okay, big fellas, you got it. It's yours. What are you going to do with it? And I hope and pray and will do everything I can. I'll be as cooperative. And I want to make that point. I'm just not pointing a partisan finger. It's been a problem with regulating utilities for a long time. And now is the time when hard questions ought to be asked. And not just in the middle of a storm, well after the storm. Even when the weather cools down, we'll be asking these questions. Because look, we could have another freezing event, you know.
Yeah, another any event. Commissioner, it's always good to talk to you. I appreciate you taking the call.
Thank you. Stay on this one.